Chantal De Lindt was having the time of her life. She had saved up every paycheck from her fast food job for 2 years for this trip. Since she was little, Chantal had dreamt about swimming with dolphins in the Swan River, since she saw a show on television about the place in Perth, Australia, where you could swim with the aquatic mammals. It caught her imagination as a 10-year-old girl, and now finally, after graduating high school, Chantal was here. Swan River runs from the ocean and cuts through the city of Perth, creating a stunning contrast to the city's concrete and skyscrapers. The river is salty and carries a host of saltwater fish, crustaceans, and the very bottlenose dolphins Chantal was so eager to see. She had rented a ride on the river with a dozen other tourists from various countries, but Chantal was not interested in them, nor did she take in the sights or greet the other friendly boaters waving at them as they passed each other. Her eyes were fixated on the water, looking for the majestic animals. After 2 hours, the raft they were on made a stop for a quick packed lunch, and the passengers listened intently to the captain's history of the river. But Chantal wasn't listening. She was waiting for an opportunity to arise when she could slip into the water the moment she caught sight of the long-awaited dolphins. Even though swimming in the body of water was prohibited, an announcement was made by the captain himself before the passengers boarded. Nothing could stop Chantal from jumping in once she saw what she came from Texas for. The pack frolicked through the water, merrily diving in and out. Chantal marveled at them. Her heart had never swelled any bigger with joy than this day. And to her delight, the dolphins came straight to their boat. One of the deckhands already had a bucket of dead fish and started throwing them in the water. The dolphins leapt to catch the treats. The crowd booed and awed appreciatively. Chantal slipped out from the crowd and slid into the water while everyone was fixated on the feeding pack. She had just started an easy breaststroke toward them when the captain began yelling at Chantal. She thought he was telling her off for getting into the water without his say-so, so she swam faster before anyone could stop her. But that was not at all what the captain was shouting about at all. If Chantal were not in such a hurry, she would have realized that he was frantically pointing out a dangerous predator making a beeline for her. The tiger shark had been attracted to the bait the deckhand threw into the water. The cheerful dolphins suddenly turned fearful and fled from the 14-foot beast approaching them at a breakneck speed. Chantal's heart sank when they suddenly turned in the water and sped off, unaware of the danger behind her. But the screaming and yelling from the boat was now so intense that it snapped her out of her hurry. It was too late when Chantal finally made out what was going on. Chantal did not even get a chance to turn and see the murderous gray shape that leaped out of the water and grabbed her by the middle. All Chantal knew was that one moment she was wistfully looking at the retreating dolphins, and the next she was underwater and in absolute agony. From the boat, the tourists were horrified to see the girl being taken down in a spectacular display of spraying blood, water, and pure aquatic rage. The padding on her life jacket bought Chantal a little time. The shark had bitten through it, deep enough to puncture her organs. It reared back and struck again, not satisfied with a mouthful of plastic tainted with the promise of flesh. Its jaws closed on Chantal with full force this time, nearly severing her in half. But the animal wasn't done yet. What little sinew was still keeping the screaming girl in one piece was ripped apart when the animal thrashed its head wildly. Chantal's upper half, still hysterically yelling for help, was thrown several feet into the air and landed in front of the terrified passengers. Only a South Korean tourist had enough sense in him to reach overboard and grab the tattered remains of Chantal's life jacket and pull what was left of her onto the boat. His tear-streaked face was the last thing Chantal saw before she sank into the darkness of death. But at least Chantal got to see the bottlenose dolphins of Swan Lake that she had dreamt about for so long before she perished. Silas Greensworth was finally out at sea. He rarely got time off from running his large tire corporation, but he had a week to spend with his sons and would take advantage of the time on his yacht at sea, just the way they liked it. The twins Malcolm and Toby were 7, and Donovan was the oldest at 12. The boys were in the custody of their mother, but even she made an effort to get the lads into every sporting event on the water. The Greensworth boys and their parents were fabulous swimmers, sailors, and rowers. Even after the divorce, they were still a seagoing family. Silas and the boys were out in the middle of the ocean, The yacht anchored far away from everyone and everything, somewhere off the coast of the Philippine Islands. The tropical waters were perfect for swimming, no matter how deep you went. And right now, the four of them were splashing in the deep, kitted out in life jackets and a few inflatable tubes tied to the boat to keep them from floating away. Besides themselves, there were only 3 other people on board: the captain, a chef, and a deckhand. The crew kept busy with everyday tasks while the family enjoyed a few hours in the water before dinner. Their games and splashes kept them so occupied that no one noticed the silently stalking fins that emerged from the water now and then. But the pack of 4 bull sharks, ranging in size from 12 feet to a massive 19 feet, was slowly inching closer to the commotion beside the large vessel. The predators had smelled the warm bodies miles away, and had spent the last hour tracking their scent. Their murderous advance beneath the surface went unnoticed until they were almost on top of the Greensworths. It was Donovan that first became aware of the danger. He yelled to his father when he finally spotted the slicing triangle only a few yards away. Silas was close to a small life raft with the 7-year-old twins beside him, but Donovan was several meters away, closest to the advancing pack. Donovan struck out to swim to his father to safety, but it was too late. Silas heard his oldest boy's scream get cut off as he was pulled down into the water by 2 of the enormous beasts. He did not allow the horror of what was happening before him to deter him from getting Malcolm and Toby to safety. He grabbed Toby by the scruff of his life jacket and hauled the small boy into the life raft. Toby had not even registered what was going on when he hit the deck. Malcolm did realize what was transpiring when he saw his big brother go down in the sudden splash of red from the feeding animals as they descended upon their prey. They were ripping Donovan to shreds. The preteen never stood a chance against the massive aquatic hunters. Malcolm was clambering onto his father's back, desperate to get out of the water and into the floating raft. The 2 remaining sharks, 12 and 14 feet long respectively, beelined for Silas, while the other 2 were tearing at Donovan. They hacked and tore into Silas's legs the moment they reached him. But the sudden weight of Malcolm on his back and the violent tug at his legs pushed Silas deeper into the water. Silas gripped the side of the raft with one hand and grabbed the boy with the other. And with the last of his breath and what remained of his strength, he boosted Malcolm up and over the edge. It was all he could do to at least get Malcolm out safely. And with that final push, Silas gave up any chance to get himself out. But the twins were safe. Silas knew his death was imminent as he was pulled down further into the hungry maws of the animals. In the seconds it took them to rip the father and son to pieces, the crew above had heard the commotion and rushed to the railings. They saw Silas push Malcolm into the little dinghy and hoist the craft immediately. They could not risk leaving the 2 cowering boys on the open water. There was no chance of saving Silas and Donovan. By the time Toby and Malcolm reached the deck, their brother and father were nothing more than scraps and bloodied seawater. The captain did go out into the water to look for any remains to bring back for the family. But the animals had spent hours diving in and out of the water, devouring every last sliver of flesh they could find. By the time the captain called in the appalling news, I could safely go out searching and there was nothing left. The twins were kept below deck to spare them the sight of the ongoing massacre on the water, in the care of the chef. It took them more than a day to finally reach the shoreline where their mother awaited them. Toby and Malcolm never got back in the water after that fateful day. What was left of the seafaring family was now forever landbound. Coral Bay, Australia was at its peak for the holiday season. The sands and waters were full of beachgoers and snorkelers. Coolers were open and spirits were jolly. But Jack Musgrave and his aging father David weren't here to chime in on the festivities. For the past 20 years, ever since Jack graduated high school, the 2 went out to spearfish in the area once a month. It was a skill David taught his son from an early age. When Jack became a man, they continued the tradition, not out of necessity but for companionship, and to take a moment between the rat race of life to catch up. Jack's daughters would spend a Saturday baking with their grandmother, while their father and grandfather went fishing. That night they would all reconvene, the Musgrave men bringing home a fish dinner, and the girls would have a cake or pie prepared for dessert. It was a time of the month that they all looked forward to and deeply valued. David drove a little farther out than usual to avoid the busy beachgoers. Though the spot they had chosen wasn't empty of people, it was significantly quieter here on the outskirts. The men dressed in wetsuits and spears in hand walked into the water. For the first hour or two, they were more intent on relaying the past month's events than seriously looking for specks of living silver beneath the clear water. But when David snagged the day's first catch, the hunt took on a more serious tone. Jack and David drifted apart, each chest deep in the surf, scanning the shallows intently. Jack quickly caught up to his father's tally by spearing 2 large fish in quick succession, so David decided that the pocket Jack had chosen was more fruitful. He went to join his son, but he stopped short when his path was interrupted by an impossibly large shape. This thing did not give off the silvery sparkle that the fish did. The dull gray beast was a 15-foot great white. Even in shock, David knew it did not belong here in the shallow water. And he was right. Hunger and desperation had brought it in from the deep ocean. The wounds of the 3 fish they speared attracted the predator to their location. It was starving, desperate, and already had its fins pulled back, ready to strike at Jack. David managed a warning shout at his son, and David turned just in time to see the gray form lunging at him. The shallow water did not allow the shark to utilize its full speed. This, coupled with David's warning, was just enough that Jack could launch himself sideways out of the gunning beast's path. The shark still managed to glance at Jack's right leg. Its teeth sheared through the wetsuit's fabric and tore at the skin beneath. David darted forward with surprising speed for a man of 64, ready to fight to the death if he had to protect his boy. The shark made a sharp turn and returned for the elusive prey, ready to strike again. But David let his spear fly when the animal reared out of the water, mouth agape and about to smash down on Jack's torso that had just re-emerged. The older man's aim was true. The point of the spear landed in its soft underbelly, spraying the air with blood before it landed back in the water. David no longer had a weapon, but Jack had regained his footing since he could not stand on his injured right leg. Jack did, however, still have his spear, and this time when the beast, now blind with pain and hunger, desperately torpedoed out of the water, Jack was ready. The massive head came out like a cannon, heading for Jack head-on, and Jack pulled back and let his missile shoot through the air. It sailed through the jagged teeth and straight down the shark's gullet. It was slicing through the hard roof of its mouth and into the soft brain tissue behind. It hit the water, thrashing in panic and spasms just 5 feet before Jack. The water was alive with fin, tail, and foam from its wild attempts to dislodge the metallic rod. The shark was no longer focused on the target that had looked so delectable only moments before. It now only knew of the agony the metallic missiles in its body were causing it. Then David was suddenly there. He grabbed his disabled and bleeding son under the armpit and hauled him toward the nearest outcrop of rock. Neither dared take the time to look back. If they were going to have any chance of escape, it would be while the beast was still focused on its injuries. It took them only seconds to reach safety, David again displaying enormous strength for a man his age. He picked Jack up and hauled him onto the sharp rock before jumping out of the water. Only when they were safely on the rock did they see the damage to Jack's leg. Deep gashes streaked his leg from knee to calf. The wetsuit's rigid material kept the exposed muscle in place and also stemmed the bleeding somewhat. A pair of teenagers had walked past just as the commotion in the water had started, and they were already on the rock to aid the 2 older men. The boys carried Jack to the sand and called the Coast Guard for help. Jack raised a shaking hand to return his father's attention to the water. The great white shark was floating lifelessly on the surface, the shiny end of the spear in its belly glinting in the sun. Later that evening, from his hospital bed, Jack woke up from surgery to his daughter's and mother's apple pie waiting on his dinner tray and news that he would be fine. The leg would suffer permanent muscle damage, but Jack didn't mind the thought of walking with a limp, considering what could have transpired. The Coast Guard stopped in Jack's room the next day too. According to them, both spears would have killed the animal. David's spear had punctured its lungs, and Jack's spear had struck it right through the skull. Both men could claim the honor of killing the king of the ocean, but they were perfectly content to eat the delicious apple pie instead.